Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle the Indian Union budget. But don't worry, we're going to use one simple idea that is going to change how you see it forever. So let's just dive right in. You know how it is, right? The moment the budget is announced, it's like this tidal wave of numbers, jargon, and so-called expert opinions just washes over you. It's so easy to feel completely overwhelmed, just, lost in all that noise. And hey, if you find the whole thing a bit intimidating, you are definitely not alone. But here's the secret, okay? The national budget really isn't as complicated as it looks. At its core, it just tells us three simple things: where the government's going to get its money, where it's going to spend it, and what its big picture vision is for the country's growth. So to really get a handle on all this, we're going to use a simple analogy that I think everyone can understand. We're going to look at the nation's budget as if it were just a really big family's household budget. So why should you even care about this? Well, because this one single document, it's the financial roadmap for the entire country for the whole next year. I mean, it affects everything, from the taxes you pay to the quality of the roads you drive on. Honestly, understanding this is the first step to really knowing what's going on and how it all affects you, personally. Okay, so let's really lean into this. Imagine India as one giant joint family. All of us, the citizens, we put our earnings, our taxes, into one big common pot. And the government, well, they're like the head of the family. They're the ones who decide on the priorities. Does the roof need fixing? Is there a big wedding to plan for? The basic idea is exactly the same. All right, so keeping that family idea in mind, let's look at the actual mechanics of how the country's finances work. And just like any household, it really just boils down to two things: what comes in and what goes out. Income and expenses. So just like your family, a country can be in one of three financial spots. You've got a surplus, which is great. You're earning more than you spend. Then there's a balanced budget, where everything's equal. And then you have a deficit, where you're spending more than you earn. But, and this is a huge difference, for a government, a surplus is actually pretty rare. I mean, think about it. Their main job isn't to hoard cash. It's to spend it on public welfare, on building the nation. That's why India and a lot of other developing countries usually runs a deficit budget. They're borrowing to invest in future growth. So how does this giant family plan even get made? Well, the whole thing kicks off way back in September. The finance ministry basically goes around to all the other ministries, you can think of them as different family members, and asks, hey, what do you need money for next year? By December, everyone has put in their requests. Then in January, once it's all finalized, they have this really cool tradition called the halwa ceremony. They literally make a sweet dish to mark the official lock-in of all the budget documents, right before the finance minister presents it all to us on February 1st. Okay, now for the fun part. Let's get into the actual numbers. Let's see exactly where this family's, the country's money is coming from and where it's all going this year. Let's simplify this. Imagine for a second that the government's entire income for the year is just one single rupee. This chart shows you where every piece of that rupee comes from. So you've got your income tax, your corporate tax, GST, those are the big ones, but look at that biggest slice of the pie. A full 24 paise of that 1 rupee comes from borrowing. That's almost a quarter of the entire income. And that right there, that's the deficit we were just talking about, visualized. And when you translate that 24 paise back into real money, wow, it's a staggering amount. To cover everything it plans to do this year, the country has to borrow nearly 17 lakh crores. To put that in perspective, that's a 17 with 12 zeros after it. That's the national deficit in cold, hard cash. It's the gap between what we earn as a country and what we plan to spend. Okay, so we're borrowing all this money. Where is it all going? Well, the top 3 spending areas really tell you a story about our national priorities right now. The Ministry of Finance gets the biggest piece of the pie, then defense, and then roads and highways. But that's just the top 3. Let's dig a little deeper. So here are the top 10 ministries. That huge number for the finance ministry, a big chunk of that is just paying the interest on all the loans we've taken in the past to cover all those deficits. Then you see consumer affairs. That's stuff like food subsidies. And agriculture covers things like fertilizer subsidies for farmers. You can see it's this really complex balancing act, trying to meet all these different needs and priorities. All right, but a budget isn't just about the numbers for this one year, right? It's also supposed to be about the long-term vision. And whenever you have big plans, you're also going to have some pretty big questions and critiques. And to really get a feel for this debate about priorities, let's just do a quick side-by-side comparison. We'll look at the budgets for two very different, but you could argue equally important, national departments. First up, we've got ISRO, our amazing space agency. I mean, these guys are at the cutting edge of technology. They're absolutely crucial for our future, for navigation, for communication, for national pride. Their budget for this year, 13,000 crores. Keep that number in your head. Okay, now compare that to the Department of Posts. It gets more than double ISRO's budget, and a huge chunk of that is just to cover its own operational losses. And this really highlights the incredibly tough choices a government has to make. It forces you to ask the question, right? Are we putting enough money into building the future, or are we spending maybe a little too much just to maintain the past? Now, looking ahead, the budget does have some pretty ambitious long-term plans. I mean, they're talking about a rare earth corridor to get the minerals we need for tech and defense. They want to boost medical tourism, build new high-speed rail lines, and even expand mental health infrastructure. These are definitely big, forward-thinking ideas. But on the other side of the coin, critics are pointing to some pretty big concerns that the budget just doesn't seem to address. For example, what about the falling value of the rupee? That makes everything we import more expensive. And there aren't really any clear plans to expand the tax base, to get more people paying their fair share. You add in things like stalled tax refunds and some, let's say, controversial foreign aid choices, and you've got the big, critical questions that really challenge the main story of the budget. Okay, that was a lot of information, I know. So let's switch gears. It's time for a quick quiz to see if you've really got a handle on one of the most fundamental concepts in any budget. Ready? So all government spending pretty much falls into two main buckets. You have capital expenses. These are the big one-time investments that create something that lasts, an asset. Think building a new highway. Then you have revenue expenses. These are the recurring day-to-day costs, like paying government salaries or keeping the lights on. The easiest way to think about it is this. Revenue expenses are for running the country today. Capital expenses are for building the country for tomorrow. And a really healthy budget tries to put as much as it can into that second bucket. All right, here we go. Here is your test. Take a look at this list of different ways the government spends money. For each one, I want you to decide, is it a capital expense, creating a long-term asset, or is it a revenue expense, just a recurring cost? Go ahead, take a second, and think about your answers. Okay, you got them? Let's see the answers. Buying fighter jets, building new hospitals, funding power plants. All of those are capital expenses. They're creating national assets that will last for years. But things like salaries, scholarships, and subsidies, those are revenue expenses. They're the recurring costs of just keeping things running. So how'd you do? And that brings us to our final thought, and it's maybe the most important one. You see, the entire budget, this whole massive plan, is built on one big assumption, that everyone will chip in their fair share. But what happens when people cheat the system, say by not paying their taxes? Well, that burden doesn't just vanish into thin air. Nope, it falls squarely on the shoulders of everyone else, all the honest taxpayers. And that leaves us with the biggest question of all. In this giant national family of ours, how do we make sure that everyone, truly everyone, carries their fair share of the weight? That single question, that's really what's at the very heart of the entire budget.